So our guest speaker is Phil Morse. He's a volunteer at the Seashore Trolley Museum, and he's going to speak to us about the Portland Railroad Company that ran the trolley line that passed through Scarborough. He's also going to talk to us about the Narcissus. He's heading the fundraising for the restoration of the Narcissus, which was an interurban car that went from Portland to Lewiston, Auburn. Yeah. So, Phil, thank you.
So, good afternoon. Yes, I am Phil Morse from the Trolley Museum. And Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. The Narcissus, as a Portland Lewiston interurban car, went from Monument Square out toward down Forest Ave, out toward Allen Ave, and then on a private right-of-way. But where Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's statue, or seated, isn't that Park Street? Where is that?
The corner of Congress and State.
Congress and State. Well, Theodore Roosevelt was a passenger on the Narcissus between Lewiston and Portland on August 18, 1914. And the Theodore Roosevelt International Highway, which is over 4,000 miles in length, and starts at Portland, Maine, and goes to Portland, Oregon, and goes up into Canada for a while. And it starts at Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's monument. That's where it starts. At the Trolley Museum, how many of you have actually been and visited the Trolley Museum? So if you've been there in the last 30 years, a couple of the buildings you see that are in the parking lot area are the copper-clad buildings from the elevated system in Boston. One is a cute little two-story switching station. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's nephew, Alexander, was the architect that designed those buildings in 1900, 1901. So there's my, I don't actually operate the trolleys. I don't take, I'm not a trolley person. I know that seems hard to imagine that I've been there over 25 years, but I like the history, I like the stories. And so thank you for inviting me today, Rod. I do have family connections here in Scarborough. My grandparents, my mother, his family, it was in Scarborough. My mother was a class of 1950 in Scarborough, and so I have family roots. And with the Narcissus, as I found out in the last 3 years in researching that, W.S. Libby, B-B-E-Y, the builder of the Portland Lewiston Interurban, is descended from John Libby. How many are descended from John Libby in the room? Well, I didn't know that I was until I attended a John Libby Family Association meeting, and was asked where my father was from, where my mother was from, and I'm from the Libbys. My parents were married actually at the Black Point Congregational Church in 1952. I have all the wedding pictures. So I didn't grow up in Scarborough. My father's from Kennebunk, but so at the Trolley Museum, I like the Maine trolleys. I am attracted to the Maine cars and have helped a number of those over the years. And so when Rod asked me to talk about the Portland Railroad, I haven't done as much research about the Portland Railroad, but we have a lot of books that have been written about the Portland Railroad, mostly by O.R. Cummings, who was our historian for many, many, many years. He passed away in 2013. But he wrote more than 50 books on histories of various railways in New England. So I've taken a lot of the excerpts from this, and I've actually released today, I do a blog, and you all have a card with my blog on it. So the blog, when you go to that blog area, online, the first post that'll come up is the one that is a companion of this slideshow. So you can read more details, see a couple more pictures. There are links to other information. So there's a lot more when you go to the blog page that follows along with the slideshow I'm doing here. So I am not a railroad or a Portland Railroad historian, but I've pulled information together for the purposes of this presentation. And so we'll get started. I have some notes down there. I know I can set this up so it just shows the big picture, but I like to, with this Chromebook, I can zoom in when I do this. If I just do the slideshow, I can't zoom in. And for some of this stuff, I'll be able to zoom in, and I like to do that as long as we can stay live. Come on, here we go. So one of the things I like to go back and talk about is
We got the lights turned on.
electricity. Is that the lights are
Back.
electricity. When in Portland, the horse-drawn trolley started work very early in the mid-1860s. Then they were electrified, and I'll talk about this as we go along. But when electricity came along, you know, it wasn't, not every house had electricity. So I like to look at, in 1910, only about 10% of the population had electricity in their homes. And so the early electric companies, those, you know, that started in the late 1800s, early 1900s, their biggest revenues came from lighting with electric lights the streets of the local cities. That was the big form of revenue. And the electric trolley cars used a lot of electricity. They were the two biggest. And then there were, in some of those communities that were large enough to have industrial businesses, those also started using electricity. So really, those were the three biggest revenue generating for the electric companies until people started feeling comfortable and being able to put electricity into their homes. And trolley systems were, let's see, in Portland, the hub of Portland was Monument Square. Literally, all the streetcar systems from Portland all went through Monument Square. Didn't matter if they were going out toward Wyndham or up toward Yarmouth or down toward Biddeford or Saco or toward Lewiston eventually. The hub was right there in Monument Square. So I found it interesting in reading OR's book that in 1923 the police chief in Portland actually proposed a subway system in Portland, which was, you know, it as you know, didn't happen, but the congestion was so severe in that area. And public transportation really was the trolley cars. In 1915, there were 90 communities in Maine that had trolley systems. In that one year, 1915, those trolley systems carried more than 57 million passengers in Maine alone in that one year. Now, the population of the state of Maine was the high 700,000s. I don't think it was quite 800,000. And so people used them to go to work. And so if you went to work on a trolley, that's one passenger. You come back from work on the trolley, now it's two passengers a day. If you went to visit family on the weekend, if you took it to go to school, you know, those are all passengers back and forth. So there's a lot of doubling up, if you will, in the course of a day. And then, of course, the tourists would come during the good weather, and so that added quite an influx of passenger service. Yeah, this is another scene. And the early cars, they tended to have open cars in the nice weather, which are what you see here, the breezers, the air conditioning of the time, and then they had the closed cars during inclement weather in the winter time. The Portland Railroad was a massive system, had total tracks of close to 95 miles, but they all weren't passenger tracks. Some of those tracks were going into the shops, or they were sidings, but they're all considered miles of track. There were about 75 or 78 miles of passenger service track, and it was very comprehensive, and it would, at one point, the Cumberland County Power Electric Company actually owned the Portland Railroad and the system out of Lewiston, Auburn. And so they did a lot of cross-marketing. And so this particular map you see, and I have some reproductions here, you can see the link. You could go from, connect to Saco from the Portland Railroad all the way up to Waterville from the Lewiston, but it was all part of the Cumberland County system, serviced by Portland and by Lewiston. So you could go anywhere. And in the Portland Railroad system in 1904, just that system, which went out, as you can see, out to the Wyndham area, it went out to Gorham, went down to Cape Elizabeth. That carried 13 million passengers in 1904. I mean, so that was major influx. And they were, in those early years, especially the Portland Railroad was a very profitable operation. And it was recognized right till the end in 1941, it was recognized where they maintained their equipment, their tracks, all their overhead was very well maintained, which was not the case generally, especially in the more rural areas, where they just couldn't keep up the financial support of the infrastructure, the track beds and the overhead and the maintenance of the cars as it became financially challenging. So with the Portland system, even though Monument Square was that hub, it also, because of the waterfront, it was an intramodal system. So you had a lot of freight service with the Portland Railroad as well. And people would connect with the steamships, Casco Bay tours, you know, all the accessing the local islands and connecting up the coast. A lot of freight and coal came in by the masted schooners or the other ships and would be unloaded. And so trolleys were an integral part of taking that material from there along with the railroad systems and dispersing it through their freight services. It was very, and you can see, I like these little, this is also a reproduction, but it shows what the cost is for a trip going out to the islands or the little half-day tours and things, and they still, of course, still do that today. Now this is the backside of that map, and this also shows pricing for trolley trips to various places. So this is a 1910 setup. So for Saco from Monument Square, it says Saco and Biddeford, round trip fare to Saco and Biddeford, 50 cents. So you go from Monument Square all the way to Main Street Saco, it's 25 cents each way. And Mechanic Falls, I mean, you go around, you see all the different places, which is yeah. And I think that's, yeah, you see the Portland Railroad, Lewiston, Augusta, and Waterville system. Let's see what's next. So for Scarborough, it says the Portland Railroad opened the Saco line from Rigby Road, and actually Rigby Road is from this map here. It's just off this map. You can see where it has Rigby Park. That's the train yard, the railroad yard, and Thornton Heights. So it came in from that side, from the north. Rigby Road, South Portland, also on Broadway, South Portland from Lincoln to Main Street at Cache Corner, and it was opened up on July 9th, 1902. So it come across, this is an image of the then new Vaughan Street Bridge, Vaughan Bridge. And those cars, 173 to 180, as part of the Portland Railroad, were workhorses. Those things, they just put miles and miles and miles on those cars year round. So the Portland Railroad originally went all the way to Saco and down what is now Route 1, or was even then, I guess, Route 1, and then they had a spur. So this here is a crew of trolleys meeting. Now, is this, I've seen this spelt a couple different ways. So is it S-C-O-T-T-A-W, or is it O-W?
O-W.
O-W? Okay, because I saw it two different ways, and I didn't know which way to do it. So so I put A-W, but I'll go in and I can correct that. So that turned out near Oak Hill, and in this map here, I think it'll show that those turnouts. Yeah, so here it's OW. So where Dunstan Corner is, just you can see There's Oak Hill turnout, TO is turnout, and the Scoto's turnout, Southgate, and then where the barn is. And then it would turn, when they open the system up to Old Orchard Beach, they'll line up to Old Orchard Beach, and you can see where the trestle, which was that original postcard picture, was of the trestle. And then there's a turnout, and then it goes on to, Route 1 all the way down to Pepperell Square or Main Street in Saco, or it would come down and hook into the Old Orchard Beach line down there. But this is about where it's going to turn out.
What do they mean by turnout? Is that just a stop?
That's a separate set of tracks that's put next to it. So there's the through line, and then a turnout is a side track, so that the cars could pull over if they're waiting for another car to go by, or they pull over to let passengers off or to board passengers. So there were turnouts, as you saw, all through the system for various reasons, whether it's to pick up passengers, it might be to drop off freight, or it might be the timing for letting another car come back through. Now, when you as audience members are looking at this, do you recognize any of those homes?
Is that what
You
you used to
recognize
get
where that is?
on? Is that up at where you used to get on up? That says Scarborough.
Tracks doubled right there,
Yeah?
and
Whose house is that?
Grammy Walker's.
That's Grammy Walker's house.
I'll make note of that.
So it's Neil and Libby's candy store.
Oh,
It's,
okay.
it's in that area.
Okay.
You see the gal that had the florist shop?
Did she have a florist shop? Right, Fran? Did she have a floral shop?
Oh, no.
So this is at that same turnout, so that house is still, that's the same, that same home, so.
She
that-
had
that-
good donuts.
Where were the cars built?
The question is, where were the cars built? Portland Railroad actually did make some of their own cars, but mostly they were purchased from Philadelphia, from the J.G. Briggs Company. They were built in Laconia, New Hampshire, the Laconia Car Company. Wasson Manufacturing in Springfield made some, so and there were other manufacturing companies as well. Trolley manufacturing, the trolley industry, at one point in the early teens was like the 5th or 6th largest industry in the whole country. So it was a massive, I mean, just in Portland, 500 employees. You know, I mean, it's a big employment base in those years. And it was for the operators, the motormen and the conductors, these were good paying jobs at the time. These were some of the higher paying jobs, and the motormen and the conductors were very well respected in their communities. So. So there was a car barn and a substation right here at Dunstan Corner. And so there's the car house. And then in this picture, you don't see the brick station, but in the lower picture, which is I pulled from the Historical Society's webpage, is the brick power house. And so that actually is right next to, looking at the picture from here, would be to the left, so it would be south of the car house. And so that survived, and that's fairly common. In Saco, where the car house was on Beach Street, the wooden car house was raised, but the brick power station in the back was saved, and that's part of a housing complex now. And you can see the little maps that have been drawn.
That doesn't look familiar.
That, we've known that was as a hole in the ground.
It's where that's where the, to the right, Mom.
Right
I'll show
beside
you
you.
Tuesday.
Don't look right.
So it was there for 30 years, until it was raised in 32. And so the trolleys went right down Route 1 initially, and right to a turnout in Main Street, Saco, and this is in Saco in those early days. And then, well, I'll show you next. Then what you could do is you would, if you were continuing to travel south, from Main Street, you wanted to go, say, to Kennebunkport, or you wanted to go to Wells, or even further south, you would get off this trolley, the Portland trolley system here, and then get on a Biddeford-Saco trolley system. And the Biddeford-Saco system went from 5 points down Elm Street and Alfred Street, and went all the way to Old Orchard Beach. So it's about 8 miles of track just for the Biddeford-Saco Railroad. But they were strongly influenced by the Portland Railroad, because the financial interests were owned by board members of the Portland Railroad. So really, the Portland Railroad controlled the Biddeford-Saco Railroad. And so they shared cars and sold cars and did stuff like that. So you would get off, if you were heading south, you would get off the Portland Railroad car here on Main Street in Saco, and you would board a Biddeford-Saco car, and you would go to Main Street in Biddeford at the City Hall. And that trolley that's in this picture is actually from the Atlantic Shoreline system. And so you can see the tracks on Main Street. So you would get off your trolley from Biddeford-Saco, get on the Atlantic Shoreline trolley, and then you would ride south. And so this is Dock Square in Kennebunkport. You go right to the bridge. They never crossed the bridge. There were always plans to expand and put trolley systems all over the place in the late 1800s, early 1900s. I mean, Bar Harbor, there were plans all over the state of Maine, but sometimes they happened and sometimes they didn't. So I like to do a plug for the Trolley Museum, because we own about 3.5 miles, close to 4 miles of the original right-of-way for the Atlantic Shoreline trolley system. So you would get on the trolley at City Hall in Biddeford, and then you go on the Atlantic Shoreline, you go right by where the Trolley Museum is now, and then you'd head right down to Townhouse Shop, or Townhouse Square, and you could then go off onto Main Street, Kennebunk, and then south down to Wells and beyond, or you could go up to Sanford from there, or you could go down to Dock Square, which is where that image is, or if you were out for a Sunday like today and you wanted to go out to eat, maybe you would go out to the casino in Cape Porpoise. And there was a wooden trestle out there that the Atlantic Shoreline had. It was originally the Sanford to Cape Porpoise line that was built by the Goodalls, the mill in Sanford. They actually built this 26-mile line from Sanford to Cape Porpoise to get coal to power the mills up in Sanford. And then the passenger service stuff came along later, but it was an economic decision to do that because they could buy coal a lot cheaper, having it come in like in this 4-masted schooner, which is full of coal, and then having it brought up by a streetcar, electric locomotive, and these cars, coal cars, all the way up to Sanford. And the project I was project manager for to restore prior to the Narcissus was the only surviving little electric locomotive that actually pulled those trains of cars. There are only 2 of them that have survived all of North America. The other one's in British Columbia. And the roof, the building collapsed on it. So the one that we restored, which is the only original Atlantic Shoreline vehicle left, was pretty cool because my family's from the Kennebunkport area on my father's side. So to be able to restore that and bring it back so it's a full operating little electric locomotive is really cool. And so people would go to the casino. And trolley parks loved casinos. Now, it wasn't a gambling casino. It was for almost every one of them. You'll see where they were well known for their shore dinners, you know. And the Cape Porpoise Casino, they might have had card rooms for playing cards. People would go there all the time to play cards, dance, and for dinners. And so there was a menu, and the view from the veranda was looking out into the harbor and right out onto the ocean, so it was a beautiful spot. And what tended to happen is, you know, if they burned down within the first couple of years, they might rebuild it because the first couple of years, business was still pretty good. But in this case, 1915 it burned and business wasn't so good. And so there's always a little question mark about the circumstances surrounding the fire in all of them. So now I'll come back. Here's Dunstan Corner. And this is O.R. Cummings, who was our library, along with Charles Heseltine, who I know is a friend former friend of the Historical Society here, Charles Heseltine, his collection, along with O.R. Cummings' collection, our library put together a hardcover book, and it's also now available in softcover. It's an atlas of all the railway systems in the state of Maine. It was published in 2015. And so there are some photographs or postcards of the area, and then all these hand-drawn maps by Heseltine. All those maps I've been showing are all hand-drawn by Heseltine. And so this is from that book. So do anyone know what this looks like? Some sort of little store or
Is it
something?
Knight's Store?
Joe Knight's, I think.
No, it's Knight's Store.
K-N-I, Knight's?
Yes.
Yeah. And there's someone walking along here. It's like, now, I know, I clearly can see this is a trolley, but that one there, I'm not really sure what that is. I have to look at it a little more, but, and the original photograph may have information on that's in the library. I pulled this from the book. So I'll come back to Dunston, and then we'll head down to Old Orchard Beach. So you have these beautiful open cars, and these are the larger open cars that would hold 75 people safely. But under crowded conditions, in some situations, you'll see people standing on the sideboards and holding on, and in some cases down in New Haven, when there's like college, Yale Bowl games and stuff, there might be 200, cadets on the roofs and everywhere else in these things. I mean, just crazy, because there's 600 volts of electricity from that wire. And if you happen to hit that somehow and you're the ground, it's not pleasant experience. So from this turnout, we go to Old Orchard Beach, and so this is a little different. This is a different postcard that I have, and so you can see there were some concrete, some sort of stanchions or things to hold that up. And what I have here, trolley travel to or from Old Orchard Beach wasn't without its risks. On August 21st, 1910, 13 passengers were injured when two open-car trolleys collided head-on. And there was a turnout, and so cars that were going to Old Orchard Beach were in that turnout, waiting for, I think this was 3 cars that were coming out of Old Orchard Beach, because very high level, a lot of traffic. And so the last trolley car coming out is supposed to have a sign saying, like, last car, so that the motormen and conductors waiting will see last car, and they know that now it's okay for them to go, because there's no walkie-talkies and radios back then. It's all signs and hand signals and things. And evidently the motorman that was waiting didn't notice or thought he saw a last car. Well, it wasn't the last car. And so both the trolley cars were heavily damaged. They were ultimately repaired, but there were 13. There are a number of deaths, whether it's in the Portland Railroad system or other systems that have occurred, whether it's collisions with cars, trolley cars with other trolley cars, or with later on automobiles, or pedestrians that maybe have had a little too much of the adult beverage or something. So Old Orchard Beach, of course, was a real mecca for many, many years. This is before the fire, this image here. I love this image, because the hotels, this is 1906, I think it says. And here you have 2 large Portland cars. And so this is a Portland open car, and this is one of those turnouts. So on the inside is a Biddeford-Saco open car. And can you see that the Biddeford-Saco open car is much smaller than the Portland open car? Where the car house was in Saco, it's on Beach Street, and there's a railroad overpass, and the trolley tracks went underneath the railroad overpass, and the big trolley cars wouldn't fit. So as much as the trolley companies wanted to have bigger cars to carry more people for the same, operators and the same, they physically could not fit. So the only reason that the little cars survived, because usually they would be scrapped out early on and they would upgrade to larger cars as the years went by. But in Biddeford-Saco, they had those little cars, which many people, many railway fans, would come to the Bedford-Saco Railroad specifically to ride those smaller open cars, because everywhere else they had vanished when the trolley systems were still going on, you know, in the 30s. So they would come, and that's how Seashore Trolley Museum started, was a fan trip when they knew the buses were coming, and they saved one of the little cars, and that's our very first trolley car from 1939. And it was built in Philadelphia in 1900. It's a J.G. Briggs car. So it's the mother trolley of all trolley museums in the world. Seashore Trolley Museum is the first trolley museum in the world that was created by individuals specifically with the purpose of starting, you know, acquiring a car to start a museum. So in this fire, the text down here says that there were 17 hotels, 20 stores, and the 60 cottages all burned, and 3 people lost their lives in that fire. And thousands of people in the days following the fire would travel by trolley from either Portland Railroad or the Bedford-Saco to go down and see all the carnage, of course. So here's a map of the, from in Portland that kind of stretches out. So we're now coming back, we've come back from Orchard Beach, we're heading back toward, we're gonna go out to Cape Elizabeth, because there were some lines, and again, Portland Railroad had all these subsidiary lines. So it might be the Portland and Yarmouth system, but it was owned by Portland Railroad. You had the South Portland and Cape Elizabeth system, but it was part of the Portland Railroad system. You have the Wyndham system, but it was part of the Portland Railroad system. So trolley companies, generally speaking, people would work 6 days a week, go to their job 6 days a week, and had Sundays off. So for the trolley museums, that wasn't a good thing, because 6 days a week, they were getting people that go to school during the school time or going to work back and forth, so they had a lot of passengers. Sunday, not so much. So to help them generate more revenue, they would build their own trolley parks, specifically as a destination for people on weekends to use a trolley to get to that park, because oftentimes that was the only way you could get to that park, because it would be built specifically by the trolley company to attract passengers to go there. And so Cape Cottage Casino, and again, it's not a gambling casino, although some of those card rooms, maybe, but it was really for the view and getting out in the fresh air and the dancing and all the different activities. So there were some absolutely stunning, beautiful trolley parks, and Cape Cottage Casino is one of those.
Where was that located?
Well, if you look at this map,
Oh, okay. Willis,
It's on Shore Road, it's still there.
so some
It's on
aspect,
Shore Road,
is it
they ripped all the outside porches off, but the
Yeah.
building is still there.
a private residence now?
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was one at Willard Beach, which we'll see in a moment too. And so as part of that, they also had a theater, a summer theater. And each one of those trolley cars holds 75 people. I mean, a lot of people use trolley cars to get to destinations.
10 cars.
Yeah, oh, and it would keep going. You'll see when they go to Riverton, some of the other parks, 10,000 people on opening day. I mean, incredible. So the theater was managed by this Bartley McCullum, a local actor who is credited with pioneering summer stock theater in Maine. It officially closed in '22. So here's the Willard Beach Grand Casino. And again, they had card rooms, meals, usually access, if it's on the coast, of course, the ocean. Inland, it was lakes and ponds and different activities. So is this the one that says 10,000 visitors attended opening day on June 10th, 1896 by the Portland Cape Elizabeth Railway, just 2 weeks before Riverton Park. It burned down 2 years later under suspicious circumstances. The $35,000 insurance settlement was reinvested in the Cape Cottage Park. So again, this is all the Portland Railroad system. And then the picture up in the top right is in South Portland. So they went right down the streets, and people could just go up to the corner.
So
Question?
the trolleys are also owned by the railroad companies? The regular trains and the trolleys, are they owned by the same?
That's where the name can be confusing, because railroad, we think of the B&M Railroad, the Grand Trunk Railroad, but these were named railroads, and the gauge of the track is the same as steam railroads, but they run on electricity. And so they really were separate organizations. And sometimes they did not get along. So if the trolley company needed to pass over a traditional steam railroad, sometimes that was it was made really difficult by the railroad, because they felt in some cases, especially the freight service piece of it, were taking business away from them. So from South Portland, we go across the $1 Million Bridge. So this is when it was relatively new. And you'll notice we're looking at it from the Knightville side, looking toward Portland. And you'll see to the right of the bridge, there are trolleys lined up. And so that's a little storage yard there. And to get to that storage yard, any of you ever go to eat at the Snow Squall restaurant in South Portland? Yeah. Well, that was the trolley barn. That was the car barn. And the brick building next to it was the power station. So similar to Scarborough, you had the car barn and then the power station, the brick power station. And so the Snow Squall restaurant was the 3 or 4 bay storage barn and shop, and then the brick building that was toward the Portland side. And then all the tracks behind it would go and they would use them as storage tracks out behind them. So your trolley tracks, once you came across in Knightville, you'd take a side track that would go around what is the snow squall in behind it, and then have these spurs for storage and so forth down the side. And so once you get over into Portland, if you kept to the right, you'd go over the Grand Trunk Railroad. And then you could go up from the Grand Trunk Railroad up to Montjoy Hill, and I keep talking about that. And so the trolleys would be up there on the promenade, and Fort Allen. Again, people, looking for an attraction for a nice Sunday afternoon, going out there in an open car with the way the air circulates off the bay there. I mean, it's beautiful. And to read some of these postcards, some of them are quite comical. So this is, Maine only had a couple of trolley systems that had really elaborate parlor cars. And Portland Railroad had the Bram Hall. And the Bram Hall actually was built by the J.G. Brigg Company in Philadelphia, and was given as a gift to the Portland Railroad. So it was given free for a thank you for all the cars that have been purchased by them, by the Portland Railroad, and in advance for orders that would come in the future. And so usually these parlor cars were for the administration of the railway system, the president and staff, and they would use it to entertain. In the corner cubbies would be where the adult beverages were stored and could be served. But you can see in this car, the middle window is a massive picture window. And it's just, they're absolutely gorgeous with this wrought iron, and they could be chartered for a day or a half day. This car was like $5 a day or a half day. So you could have your own private party and go to Riverton Park or wherever, Willard, or go to the cottage, birthday or wedding or something like that. So for $5 you could use that car. But that, I think, went until 1922, and then it was scrapped. Because for us, it's like, oh. So then we go back to Monument Square, which is where everything goes. And so starting in 1914, you could take the Portland Lewiston Interurban, which are these big cars, and you can see how much larger they are than the other Portland Railroad cars. They were very majestic, large, 46 feet long, all mahogany interior with inlay, 40 later stained glass windows. They would do in excess of 70 miles an hour. The operators wore white gloves. I mean, it was a luxurious ride. And so what the Portland-Lewiston system would do is they negotiated using the Portland Railroad tracks starting in Monument Square and down Forest Avenue to Allen Avenue. And then there was a 30-mile private right-of-way built by W.S. Libby up to Auburn. And then in Auburn, they would then connect with the Auburn-Lewiston system, and they had a contract to use the electrical system and the tracks there in coordination with the Androscoggin and Kennebec, or whatever the name was at the time, because these trolley systems always were being bought up by other trolley systems. They'd get into financial trouble, and then some syndicate out of New York might buy them, or they'd merge with somebody else, so the names are changing quite rapidly.
What did they do in the winter to clear the tracks?
They had snow plows, they had the big broom brushes. Sometimes they would hire, many men with shovels. And it really depended on the community. So what we're going to do is from Monument Square, we're going to go down to, if you were on the Portland-Lewiston interurban car, you would go to where Allen Ave is, right here. And then you would pick up the private right-of-way. But if you were going to Riverton Park, you would go a little further out on Forest Ave, and you would take the Riverton Park line. And they had a beautiful, massive, they would spend like $35,000 to build these casinos. I mean, they were 3-4 story, majestic places for the locals to go just to play cards or to have a meal or whatever. It was really quite a thing. So what do I have here? Yeah, entered its own right away, Allen Ave. Center of attention was Riverton Casino, dine, dance, play croquet, outdoor theater. So the trolley would bring you right up, and so this picture is being taken from standing on the casino, looking out at the yard, and they had a little bandstand here and various things, but people would go there. They had canoeing, boating. It was, a place for lovers to go, to go on their date, and the boating, and there was an outdoor theater that would hold 1,000 people could attend that. And they had vaudeville acts. They had acts come up from Boston and New York throughout the summer, because thousands of people would attend this thing in the summertime. So it was really the place to be. And again, went into the 20s. Look at all those trolley cars. And all those open cars all hold 75 people or so, and just the whole line goes around. And again, this picture is being taken from probably the second or third story of the casino. I think the attire, they're dressed a little differently than the visitors that come to the Trolley Museum today. So if we come back to Monument Square and then head up the coastal route, going off to Falmouth, the Portland Railroad owned the Portland-Yarmouth line, and so the only Underwood, anyone heard of the Underwood? Is that right up?
It's still a public park.
Yeah, and so Underwood, their claim to fame was it was built right on an electric, Maine's only electric fountain at Underwood Spring Park. And I like the wording. It says it opened in the summer of '89. Built upon an underground spring that gushed forth 250,000 gallons of healthful water. I think healthy probably is what they meant, but healthful water every 24 hours. So day trippers would come out of Portland, just like a 20-minute ride or so. And at night, between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock at night during the summer season, the engineer would, because they had this fountain that you can see in the background, in this picture up there, you can see a fountain in the background. They would have different colored lights, and for an hour they would do a light show with the fountains and the lights and different colors, and so that was a huge attraction for Underwood during that time. But you could go on up to through Cumberland and all the way up to Yarmouth. And then from Yarmouth, let's see what I had next. You could go up to Freeport. You'd change, at Yarmouth, you would change trolleys. And you'd be on a trolley car of the Brunswick, Lewiston system. And so the fellow that built that trolley system was considered the electric railway king of the Pine Tree State. And his name is Amos Fitzgerald. Well, in this situation, Fitz is his middle name, but actually Fitzgerald was his last name. But because of the time period, he thought it would be, from a business perspective, he'd be better off if his last name were Gerald instead of Fitzgerald because of point of origin and how people were perceived then. And he personally, the state of Maine had 520 miles of rail trolley tracks at his peak. And he personally was responsible for chartering more than half of those systems, from Calais to Kittery. I mean, he was involved in trolley systems all over the place. And he loved castles. So if he was involved in the in developing a trolley park, and this one in Freeport is, and so that's Amos and his castles. Now that tower still stands. Yeah. But how many people actually know the story about what it is? It's like, wow, did they come from Europe in the 1400s and build castles in Maine? No. It was Amos. And so, so that was a huge attraction.
I think the engineer of that postcard put those two pieces together, and the part of it on the right, I question that ever was in the state of Maine. You know, in the 1930s,
Yeah.
the German people, who were great with color photography at the time, they put things together. Now, the Historical Society's got a picture of a 4 or 5 story building on Dunstan Corner that's called the Moulton House.
Yeah.
That same picture is in the Saco Benefit Savings Bank, the Scarborough branch. It's in on the Clambake at Pine Point on the wall.
Yeah.
And Chet Mitchell's barn is sitting right where it's supposed to be. But that building was never there. That building was never a 4 or 5 story square building.
Yeah, we found there's
And I'm looking at these and wondering how many of these are fake. They
Well-
tell me that the pole and headlight is chalked up in for the Netherlands.
well, that's what makes this all fun.
Certainly
There's a postcard of Theodore Roosevelt on the end of the Narcissus in gray, waving to the crowd. And the Narcissus was a dark green color, the exterior. So in 1914, when the picture, of Roosevelt being at Gray, it was branded only 2 months old. So it was a dark green, almost black color. But a postcard shows it as being red. It's like, what? And in Saco, where the trolley system for the Benefit Saco went down Main Street heading north and then turned on Beach Street, the big church is right on the corner there. It burned, 10 or 15 years ago. But the early postcards that were done in Germany show that as a brick building because they were back in Germany going, they wouldn't have wooden churches.
There you go.
Wooden churches that big, that must be brick. So you had this like, yeah, that was never a brick. So you're right, but. All right, so now in Brunswick, they had Merry Meeting Bay, which was a massive place, 120 acres. And you notice anything that looks like a castle piece? Yeah, Amos again has to have his home looks like a castle. In Fairfield, there's a 3-story hotel. Originally looked like a castle. That was his thing. So Merry Meeting was a massive park. Had wild animals and all kinds of things, activities there. Again, a big outdoor theater, 7 times larger than Riverton Park. But in the 20s, they had crocodiles, monkeys, buffalo. They had all kinds of things, so people would go there. And here's the other parlor car from Maine. That was part of the Brunswick system. Now, this was made in Amesbury, Massachusetts, at the Briggs Carriage Company. And has two trucks, and the truck with trolleys is the wheel motor assembly that goes underneath. So the smaller cars would have one set of truck, a single truck underneath in the middle, be kind of tipsy-turvy, but the larger cars would have two trucks for stability. So this is a two-truck open or parlor car. The Trolley Museum has a single truck, little parlor car from Manchester, New Hampshire, that was made and looks just like this by the Briggs Company. And just before Christmas, we delivered a reproduction that we built at the Trolley Museum for a private, a person came to visit 5 years ago and said, "Oh, I like that, can you make me one?" Seriously, it was delivered the week before Christmas. And the body was made by one of the boat builders up in Bar Harbor, and it was over $1 million. It is the first trolley to be made in Maine in over 100 years. And so we did all the mechanicals and all that stuff, and then the body part and the wrought iron was all made, but it's a replica of our City of Manchester car. To go 1,000 feet from his house to the water. 1,000 feet. His neighbor had to sign off on the construction. Madonna, anybody know Madonna? Julia Roberts is 3 houses down. It's in Miami. But again, look, these people, this is like a Sunday outing, going out for dinner.
Is that Charlie Chaplin?
I was like,
So this car was $10 a day, but also was scrapped. So you could, from Brunswick, you could take a trolley system from there and go all the way over to Lewiston. So this is in Brunswick. And then from Lewiston, again, it's like Portland, another hub. So you could go north to Waterville, you could go all over the place from there. And there were well-known restaurants and casinos and things along the way. And people, especially, the local fairs, Topsom Fair, you go to Bowdoin College, you go by trolley. You go to Bates College in Lewiston, you went by trolley. Ed Muskie would take the interurbans to go to attend when he attended Bates. A lot of people used trolley cars. So then I'm going to come back. I'm not going to take you to Lewiston. I'm going to take you back toward the end. So the system, the Portland system, was done in '41, but they over the years started to close up the other pieces that they had. So the Portland Saco trolley service ended April 16, 1932. And so this is supposedly the last trolley on the last day, and it's in Saco as they're closing up on Main Street. And this trolley car 179 was used for another 9 years. And so service from Scarborough stopped, and they used this open car here as a work car. And so they pulled the tracks up, and then as soon as that job was over, that car was scrapped. Anybody know where the Cedar is?
in Oak Hill.
Oak Hill?
Where the scene
Yeah, so, because, of the over 200 streetcars that operated in Portland, there's only one that survived. And this is at Thornton Heights. And once the service was ended through Scarborough and off to Saco, Thornton Heights was the end of the line for a while for the Portland Railroad. So these are called Bernie cars. And it's a smaller car, would hold maybe 25 people or so, had one truck in the middle, very bouncy car. And in collecting oral histories over the years from people, especially in the Saco area, boys will be boys, and so I would hear these stories about, when the football team would get in, we'd get toward the back, and we'd all jump into one corner and derail the car. And we have a couple of these cars, and they are very bouncy. So this is a Portland car. Several of these little Bernie cars were sold to the Bedford Saco system in 36 and 37. And so they could operate the cars out to Thornton Heights, but then they'd have to trailer the car to the Saco line. And so Thornton Heights is where that transition took place. So 622 was one of those cars. The body we have, and we actually had found a truck years ago that will, once it's restored, is a exact truck for the car, is 615. So we have 615. And that's the only one that has survived of all the Portland cars that are on. And this is that same car. You can see they did a nice new paint job and thing on, so that's 622. just from the other side, is now loaded and it's going to be trucked and used at the Bitterford-Saco line for another 3 years until '39. And the only reason the 615 was saved, which is quite often the case in these 30s and 40s, is the body was sold and used as something else for many years. In the case of the Bitterford-Saco line, the body of 615 was used as a workers' construction demolition piece for pulling up the tracks and the overhead wire. They used that as the meeting place for the workers. And then one of the trolley museum guys bought the body, brought it to the trolley museum. So actually it was the third car in our collection that came. That was 1940, 40 or 41 came. 40, I think, after the Manchester car. And so the Portland system itself ended in 1941. But I wanted to show this was really the last activity that would have gone through Scarborough, trailering trolleys to the Bitterford-Saco that were sold from the Portland line. And you can see this car in the background is probably for the workers to go back on the Portland Railroad that operated the car out to Thornton Heights. And then we come to the Trolley Museum. So this is the very first car that we acquired from Saco, little open car, holds 60 people, and because it would fit under that bridge on Beach Street. And this was last couple of years. So, so our 80th anniversary is going to be in 2019. So, because this year is our 79th anniversary year, and it was just 3 college undergrad students out of Boston area, and then their buddies. What saved that car? 150 bucks. And they had no idea. I mean, they're from Boston, had no idea, what to do with it, how to. And they ended up through couple of trolley guys out of Saco, hooking them up with a former Atlantic Shoreline guy in Kennebunkport who said, "Yeah, there's a farmer out here that might sell you some land." And the original 10 acres where our trolley museum is came from a farmer, and that was put in the field in July of 1939, sort of like howling at the moon, they said. And so I'm working on the Portland-Lewiston Interurban number 14, Narcissus. The original 6 interurbans were all named after flowers. And the fellow who built the line, W.S. Libby, wanted not only the employees, the operators, to have a special experience with each car, but also wanted the passengers to have a special experience. So he became really engaged with, "Oh, I'm riding the Narcissus," or "Couldn't wait for the Arbutus." "Oh, it's number 12, it's the Gladiola." And so he didn't just want numbers. And so his daughters, he had 2 daughters and 2 sons, and his daughters encouraged him to name them after his favorite flowers. And so the Narcissus is the only one that has survived. And again, it was a body. It was a summer camp at Sabattis Pond for over 35 years. The fellow bought it in the late 30s for $100. And one of his 2 sons passed away this past fall, 76 years old. He grew up, he and his brother grew up, as that summer camp. And we were very blessed to develop a relationship with he and his family. And he shared some home pictures from the 60s inside the car and stuff. It was really cool. And I do a fundraising weekend in the summer at the museum to raise money for the Narcissus restoration. And this past summer, on the Friday night, we had 14 descendants of W.S. Libby attend that Friday night opening, and that's what that group picture is there. So there were 9 great-grandchildren, 2 or 3 great-great-grandchildren, and 2 or 3 great-great-great-grandchildren of W.S. Libby that attended and had their picture taken in front of the number 1 end of the Narcissus. And you can see in the shop here, this is the Narcissus, and it's not looking itself right now. So we have to, what we're doing right now is we have to take these side sills off. And so that's what we're working on right now, is to separate those and take them off. And 37 feet long. And they're encased in a channel iron, steel channel iron. And 100 and some odd years, the deterioration between where the wood meets that metal, we can't spend $500,000 or $600,000 to restore this, and then 20 or 30 years from now have that fail. So while we have it apart, we're going to, as difficult as it is, and it's really difficult, we're going to address that issue. And so finding old growth southern yellow pine, a timber that's over 37 feet long is going to be a challenge, but that's just what we do. The little one I did, the electric locomotive I did before this, was 34 feet long, built in Laconia, New Hampshire. And the reclaimed lumber place in South Portland, Russo's Reclaimed Lumber, any of you use John Russo. He found, for the locomotive, he found one of the mills up in Lewiston was being raised, and there was one timber in there that was 24 inches by 24 inches by 40 feet long. From the 1880s or whenever the mill was built. And he had to truck it to Springfield, Massachusetts to find a mill that could handle that timber. And from that, we had two 34-foot long sills, and then repair pieces for the center sills, so we could do it all. Because we had some federal and state funding from that, and the Maine Historic Preservation Commission had to sign off and things. So the Narcissus is also on the National Register of Historic Places, as is the Portland car that we have. Actually, 10 of our cars, Maine cars, are all in the National Register. And so, attending meetings like this for grant writing, for your own organization, for our organization, is really important that you're turning out to support the Historical Society, in this case also the Trolley Museum, because when we're writing grant applications and trying to show that we have community support for what we do in our mission, having meetings like this and showing attendance and your financial participation, but also just registering, showing the numbers, is really important to show those grantors that you're supporting the organization and its mission. And it doesn't always have to be in money. It can be if you're volunteering for them and this, I know for us at the Trolley Museum, we have some really dedicated volunteers that put in hundreds of hours a year, but don't document it and turn it into the office so we can use it when we're writing grants to show how many volunteers and how many thousands of hours those volunteers put in the course of a year. They've been there long, it's tedious, for whatever reason they choose not to do it. And thank God they're helping us, helping the museum. But from a fundraising standpoint, it's really important. So I'm going to stress to you, those of you that are members at the Historical Society, turn in your volunteer hours, because they absolutely help in grant writing. All right, that's my little. So now you have this is an image from the Great Historical Society, and I wish they hadn't. It wasn't the Historical Society, but when they received this, somebody put Teddy Roosevelt and then an arrow right to his face. It's Teddy Roosevelt. Oh dear. So this is Teddy Roosevelt. No, really it is. And in gray on August 18th, 1914. And he actually rode the Interurbans twice. On August 18th, 1914, on a trip from Lewiston to Portland, and he was out campaigning for the Progressive Party candidates. It was an off cycle for, it wasn't a presidential campaign of other offices, but so he was out campaigning for them. And then he came back in 1916 and also rode one of the Portland-Lewiston Interurbans from Portland up to Lewiston, from Portland to Lewiston, but I haven't been able to find out which car he rode. This one here, I found a newspaper article that said specifically, and then he boarded the Narcissus. So you look at this, and for those of us that know the Interurbans, I know which end this car is because the windows are different. This is the number 2 end. The number 1 end has a smoking compartment, and so the first window is a big window. 2 windows with one big stained glass window. So the number 2 end has this window, which is right over there.
Is it this one?
It's this one here is this one up here in the clear story. And so it has 40 leaded stained glass windows and mahogany sash. They've all been restored. They were restored in Saco, and they're all at my house. And passenger windows, which is, there's one there with the brass. We have 16 original ones. The others have to be made from mahogany, and volunteers doing that now. But if you look at this, the Interurbans all look the same. And the only way you can tell the difference is by the stained glass windows, because the ones built in Wasson are different than these. So I know this is a Laconia car. It would say Narcissus and have its number, but you can't see that. And it would have its number up here, but you can't see that. So for me, when you read the postcard and it says the Narcissus, well, for me to go after big grants, because I need hundreds of thousands of dollars, I need a little more evidence than just this is the Narcissus. And fortunately, you know, I found a newspaper article that said that day, and then he boarded, you know, the special car Narcissus. So we're good. So we're tied in with the Theodore Roosevelt Association down in Manhattan and Long Island. Had the great privilege of meeting Ken Burns and having dinner with him and talking about that. He gave us permission to use a quote of his to help promote the project. The Roosevelt family, a lot of Roosevelt members, Theodore Roosevelt Association members down there and stuff. It's really cool. Ken signed posters from the Roosevelt series he did, stuff we could use for fundraising along with friends of Sagamore Hill. So it's a cool project. For one of the fundraising nights, we put the clerestory windows all in. There are 26 of them, and we put in on the smoking compartment side. We put in the 51-inch leaded stained glass windows over double passenger, and we put some of the mahogany in place that's been restored in the smoking compartment. We did photo ops in that Friday night special event where we sell tickets and do silent auctions, that kind of stuff. But I thought that was a cool picture because you start to get some idea of what it's going to look like when it's completely done. But it actually looks worse now than in that picture. But, so some of the things that you'll see that are here from a fundraising standpoint, the stained glass windows that were restored in Saco, the woman who does it, Deb Karen Plord, she found that depending on which glass it is, there were two different manufacturers, original manufacturers, 1912. Both those companies were still in business when we restored these in 2015. And they still had old inventory of the glass batches that made the Narcissus. So any glass that we actually had to replace came from the same manufacturer, the same batch numbers. But one of the sister cars, the Arbutus, number 10, actually was purchased as a complete operating car in 1933, and by one of the daughters of W.S. Libby. She brought it to Saco and put it in her yard as a memorial to her father, complete, ready to operate, put on tracks, put the power to it, and go. And she had it as a memorial until she had it scrapped in '46. She gave some parts to the Gray Historical Society, some to the Maine Historical Society, and somehow some of the clerestory windows that are up in that peak made it to a trolley museum in Connecticut. And in 2001, when we were doing some work on the Narcissus and put it out in our newsletter, one of the fellows down there said, "I think we have some parts for one of those cars." And so they contacted us and they gave us those original Arbutus leaded stained glass clerestory. So we actually extracted glass from those, and put it in the Narcissus so that literally all the glass and all the mahogany sash and the clerestory are all original glass. So you do a lot of cool, fun things. So we use some of this glass, the woman who restored them, to make these little sun catchers. And so we sell these sun catchers to raise money for the project. And so 100% of what the cost is for those goes to the fund. And we also did an original work of art that was turned into postcards. So we sell postcards, and today we're selling those. There's a box of 10, and they're 50% off, so they're $10 for the envelopes. And this is an original work of art too, this is Morrison Hill Station. And in Cumberland, West Cumberland, the Narcissus would stop at this station. This is an original 1915 metal-clad, little tiny 10x5 station, because you're in really rural area. And so we acquired it in the early 90s. And so this is titled Waiting for the Narcissus. So again, we have some of those, and there are packs of 5 of those, 5 of each in one box for today for $10. And O.R. Cummings was, when they were taking down the systems, he was really friendly. His mother went to Bates. And so this is actually a little porcelain, it's about this size, porcelain tile. And there was one at every ticket booth for the Portland listed into Urban. So he acquired an original one, and it's in our museum collection. But I can see this and say, well, this isn't a Laconia-built car, because the stained glass windows are different. So that's a Wasson-built car. So it's not the Narcissus. Sorry. I'm sure everybody in the Historical Society kind of gets on their track about something, but, so that's my spiel. If you have any questions, you want to turn the light up? I don't know how, did I just go like for 2 hours?
The power station here in Scarborough, did they generate their own power, or did they convert all their power from the grid?
From Deer Rips, the power, the dam up in Lewiston, they sent the power down, and they would have to have these substations every so often to reinvigorate the system because of DC. And that's why back, when Edison came up with the DC system and Tesla came up with the AC system, that was one of the downfalls with DC for powering, major systems, was you had to put these substations to keep, doing stuff every so often. Actually, I visited one of W.S. Libby's grandchildren. There was 6. One is still with us. He's 92. Still goes to work at the mill every day. His 3 sons. Bless him, Paul. And I had a visit with him last fall, and he gave me a piece of copper wire, massive stuff, and it was used because they would have to do tensile strength, stretch it, and see how much it would take, and from an engineering standpoint, if it would hold up. And he gave me one of those test strips that came from Deere that did the PLI line, and so that was one of the things. That dam was built in 1902, and the Androscoggin Light and Power came from that, and the revenue piece, because Libby built the dam, had the water rights because of the mill, had the electric companies, and built the trolley system, the interurban system, to get use to buy his electricity to Portland. So that was part of the underlying.
So it came DC all the way down from Lewiston?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
How long did that happen?
From they built the system, built the line between 1910 and 1914 because you're going to do it seasonally. It was really horses, and it was hand labor. Italian immigrants mostly built the line.
Well, in Portland, there was DC power delivered to buildings with elevators.
Yeah.
Elevators, and into the late 50s that I know of.
Yeah, some of your wood mills still use 600 volts because we
They
have.
produce their own, though.
Right, but they're still using that technology in some of those big mills. Because we have, some of our volunteers will work at the mills and they'll be able to work on our electric systems because they have that experience of working with 600 in the mills. Any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, I took the trolley, the South Portland to Portland trolley, one of its last runs from the corner of Front Street and Broadway, and I thought it was about 1946. I thought it was about 10 years old, but you say it was 41 that they stopped with?
Coming out to certain lines, it might have gone, maybe it did go a little bit later in town, it might have gone a little later.
This was from Front Street and South Portland
Yeah,
into
46.
Portland.
46 sounds
This book says 41.
Yeah, I was going to say 40. Sanford was the last community, and it's just a small 2 or 3 mile stretch that had passenger service, and that ended in I think that was 47. I think that passenger service ended in Sanford because we have the last streetcar that carried passengers in Maine, and it came from Sanford. We have that number 88. And then they had freight service for a couple more years, and we have the little electric locomotive that came from Sanford, which lasted until 49. So
So I would have been younger than I thought I was.
Was it the gasoline engine that killed them all?
it's a combination. There are people that say, well, Goodrich from tires got to go, Goodyear got together with Standard Oil, and they all, got together to put the trolley systems out. And there are certain cases where you can see in some municipalities, they got together with their bus companies and undermined, bought out contracts and made it very lucrative to get rid of the trolley system, then put the bus systems in, and then the rates all changed. So that did happen. But trolley systems were always in financial trouble. The only funding they had was what they could generate themselves. There were no getting support from the municipalities, the states, the federal government. There wasn't any of that funding. So if companies would come in like these they start off, they might make some money, but then once cars started to come along and people could make their own decisions about when to go somewhere, having that freedom meant a lot. So cars certainly played an important role in that, but it wasn't the only thing.
There's a huge amount of maintenance costs.
Right, and that's, your payroll, the maintenance. I mean, they tried so many things. They went into single operating cars, per person in a car to cut down. Technology allowed them to change how many light bulbs were inside. I mean, they did many, many things to try and save things. They tried in 1930, the presidents of the major trolley companies in the country got together and came up with a certain design that looked more like buses, the PCC systems. And you look at the body design, no matter what major city, they look the same, but the color scheme is a little bit different. And there might be some little nuances, and that reinvigorated the system nationally for a period of time. But you talk late 20s and the 30s, and the Depression hit, and I mean, it was a combination of things. It wasn't just one thing. They kind of reached the end of their usefulness based on what the economy was.
No, I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we've had streetcars way later than that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, New Orleans still has their original streetcars. Philadelphia is still.
San Francisco's got
right.
a good collection of
Yeah.
historic cars.
And San Francisco has the cable cars, but they also have the electric streetcars. So they've been doing that, the Market Street lines, all those lines, and they've been, there's been a resurgence in the last 25 years or so in some of these metropolitan areas to be heritage lines, and they might be light rail, and then they mix in some of the real old restored cars if they saved them. I mean, some of these systems were massive. In Minneapolis, we have one car from Minneapolis. There's one picture in the yard, the storage yard. There's 700 of the same car in one yard, and they're all gone except for 3 or 4 of them. So they would stack them up and set them on fire. Question?
Now that your program is 100 years old, and you're going to restore that car with its smoking compartment, no smoking sign in there.
Well, the curatorial committee has been struggling with that. We've had the car since 1969, and they continue to struggle with that issue in particular.
No, I'll answer that question. The museum's policy is when people come in the door, no smoking, no food in certain places, especially on the cars, things like that to protect the object. So that smoking issue, they'll say a smoking car, but don't anybody dare light it up because my operators, I'm the operating boss, I'll allow them to use the pilot extinguisher.
And the spittoon that was in the car, that will be there, but that will be off limits. And you'll see in some of the cars, they have, where the windows will fit down, there's a little wooden trap that you open up, and then the window can be actually put down into the slot into the body of the car. And the reason that they put that little wooden protector over there once the window is down is because people would take their chewing tobacco and go, and then you put the window up, and it's like, there's all these fun little things that you learn in the trolley museum. Historically significant little mementos.
Was it you that said you were going to explain what the little wooden box is?
I can do that. The 30-mile, I can just, there was a phone booth at the end of each end of the private right-of-way. And so the car would have to stop. So in Deering Junction was one in Portland, and then Fairview Junction in Auburn was the other. So in between was the right-of-way, the 30 miles right-of-way. And so they ran poles with the 600 volts electricity, but also ran a wire for their private telephone line. Each of the substations had a phone, and then these phone booths had a phone. So when the car would have to stop, when it's entering a line and call in, they would get out, open up the booth and ring in to the dispatcher in Lewiston and get their orders. And what time they could leave, where they're supposed to stop, where they're supposed to pull out into turnouts and those types of things. And then when they got to the other end, if they left Deering, called in, got their orders, then they would If they were going all the way through with just a couple of stops, they would stop at Fairview and have to call, because they have to enter the railway system of the Auburn-Lewiston. So they had to coordinate these other systems. Well, the 30-mile stretch, the substations had phones, but during emergencies, how are they going to communicate, especially during a snowstorm or something? They're in the middle of nowhere, the dairy farm country up there. So they have this cell phone. Each vehicle had this cell phone. And I say cell phone because it has two 1.5 volt dry cell batteries. And it has a magneto in there and a bell system. And there's a Bakelite handled, and then you can attach wires, and they would have a foldable, 20-foot long metal rod that would fold up, and there were 2 wires inside with connections and a loop around one end. So what they would do is, in an emergency situation, they'd have this phone, they would put down their window, unfold this 20-foot long wire with a hook, and they would, out the window, hook it on their live telephone wire, and then wire up the phone, and then crank up the dispatch saying, we just hit a cow, or whatever it might be. No, seriously. I mean, that 30-mile stretch had 50 cow tunnels built into it. Culverts, for cows to go underneath, because it was all dairy farms up there. So along the way, they had many milk platforms, so the farmers, milk in the morning, they put out the canisters, and the freight service would pick up the milk at night. So it's amazing stuff. So I want to thank, I have 2 students here from Thornton Academy. I work at Thornton Academy in Scarborough. And we have an international residential life program with over 200 students from 30 different countries that go to school at Thornton Academy. And they either live in dormitories on campus or live with families in the community. So I have 2 freshmen with me here today, they're both from China, Owen and Kevin. And they're helping me out So they're learning much more about trolleys now than ever. So, any other questions?
Thank you.
Yeah. So come up here and look at what we have.